exactly. Yeah.
I think we've got kind of Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to an informal but formal session as part of SABCS 2024. It's a privilege to be joined by three really talented people in the field of breast cancer research. And really the idea or the goal of this session is really to get some information to you and also hear from you about what your needs are in the current development of your career and research programs so that we can help facilitate the knowledge that you need as well as develop programs in the future that cater to people that are in early or junior career portions of research. And so just a few housekeeping portions for today. I'm going to just introduce briefly three of our speakers. They'll go through some content and some key information that I felt was really critical in understanding the hows and the pitfalls of doing some of this work that they've navigated quite well and are very experienced in. And then we'll open to a question and answer session as well to hear from you and the online audience. What's most meaningful to you and how we can answer some of the questions that come through the content today. So my name's Brenda Ernst. I'm one of the breast cancer oncologists at Mayo, Arizona. I'm very interested in education, and I do quite a bit of both industry-sponsored and investigator-initiated research, and I'm early in my career as well, and I'm learning some of these things along with you. So to start with, I wanted to take a little bit of an opportunity to get to know some of you. If you feel like you'd like to come a little closer and engage amongst yourself, if you're comfortable where you are, please feel fine to either kind of move towards the center of the room or just stay in place is fine. But we'll open up an opportunity for both in-person and also dynamic questions through Slido today. So with the advent of the audience response system, we wanted to get to know a little bit about who we're speaking to. So if you wouldn't mind telling us, who we are seeing in the audience. I've been told both earlier today and just shortly that we have an audience response system going on. I think it may be active in the online session, but I don't know if the audience here is able to see the QR code come up. But if so, we'll go ahead and move forward and getting to know the key pieces and people that are involved in these conversations so that we can speak to you more personally. So it looks like we have a pretty diverse group of commenters that are adding to the conversation. Happily, clinicians engaged in research like myself, some basic science researchers and clinical researchers as well, and also some patient advocates. So really happy to have your time. I know that there's many things competing for your attention, and also trying to understand what are some of the things that are really important to you in this session and that you hope to learn from our conversations? We need some Jeopardy music. I really always enjoy these type of conversive poll questions because it gives us both a broad idea of what people are thinking, but then also really allows us to see what's the most important and challenging things currently for people as they develop this research. And as we trail into one of the next questions, this one's a little bit selfish for my own interest. This was a burden of my heart over the last few years as I sat in my fellowship program director role, and now transitioning more into a research-driven space, but my heart in education. I really wanted to try and understand our audience and at San Antonio how we can really cater a little bit more to trainees and early researchers. And so when I ask you this question about how you heard about us, just helps us understand how better to reach the audience in the future too. I'll let you kind of respond to this in your own time about the things and topics that could be of importance to you today, and that'll allow us, when we come back to our question and answer session, for our speakers really to dial in on maybe it ends up being a little bit more cozy, like a fireside chat once we're finished with the formal content of our conversations, but really to make sure that we're able to answer and learn from the questions that you ask amongst each other. A lot of times the questions that are happening very informally at the end of a presentation, I think are really where the money is at. And so for me, I think the scenario that I've encountered in my research journey thus far, and I hope it'll be a lot longer and more successful, is that oftentimes, much like this morning, you just have to get really flexible and going with what's needed at the time and really understanding what it is you're passionate about. And so it'll be a bit dynamic today, but also I think that that's a little bit more real and genuine, and I hope that that delivers to you as well. I think that much of our polling questions that had gone back and forth throughout the planning of this and a little bit of technical challenges have transitioned from my formal presentation into a little bit of glitchiness with the Slido. And so from that standpoint, if it's okay with our technical assistants, I'll really take a few minutes and just remind the audience, and for those that may not know who our speakers are, who we'll be listening to today, and then we'll move forward into having some conversations. I certainly think that the topics that you're each sharing are really important and really driving home some of the content that we as a team look to develop in our conversation and content that we'll be providing during the conversation today, really about writing probably for funding, I think is really an important topic that we'll hear a little bit about today, as well as what are the opportunities and means to connect with funding sources. Where's the mentorship? How might you engage with people that are in the field of your interest? Because it is a very big space and there can be variable opportunities. Those that you're aware of, some that might be looming or feeling very hard to navigate, and then some that we oftentimes aren't aware of that are a little less intimidating and really important steps on this road. And so I think these are all really helpful for the audience and amongst each other to learn from the questions that you might be struggling with or challenges that you might have encountered. So without any additional questions for this portion, I really wanted to get to the meat of the matter. And so for our first speaker, it's my honor and joy actually to ask Dr. Tolaney if she'd come join us and talk to us a little bit about her experience and guidance on foundation and community program and support. And that I think has really allowed her to be quite successful. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Brenda. So today I'm going to be talking about foundational funding. I will say I'm someone who over my career did not get a big NIH grant to support my research, and most of my research has been funded either through foundations or industry, and we'll turn to industry funding with Minetta soon. So I think they're just pulling up my slides. So I think when we think about foundational funding, I really think about it as different groups of people who, put together funds to support our work. So there are public foundations, there are private foundations, and there are industry-based foundations that are available. I don't know if they're not able to. And so when you think about the public-based foundations, a lot of times these groups are looking for public support to help support building up a fund to provide outreach. The private foundations also work to provide funds as well as the industry groups. But again, the approach that you take with each of these is slightly different. Maybe they don't have the slides, but I can certainly do it without them.
Yeah, I was going to say, or perhaps what we could do is.
Oh, there we go. Yay. So maybe just to take a step back, the way we think about funding is, I think, one, you need to support the work that you're doing. So that's clearly why a lot of us are going to go apply for foundational funds. But I think a lot of it is also to get pilot funding. So sometimes you need to get, funds to help support a much larger grant. So maybe you want to apply to get a KO8 or an R01, but you don't have any preliminary data, and you need funding to be able to develop that preliminary data so that you can go on to get larger funds. And so that's also certainly a big motivation to do it. Also it is prestigious to get these grants, and certainly also one of the reasons people apply. It also can provide support to you to go to meetings like this, to get, to network with other colleagues, which also, again, can be important for your career. So these were just the types of foundations that I was referring to: public, private, corporate. So, these are just some examples of different foundations I'm sure you have heard of. When you think about one group that I think we're also quite aware of is certainly grants, for example, by ASCO. And I think you've heard of different types of grants, some that are focused on young investigators, others later investigators. And when you think about this and you're trying to figure out funding for yourself, obviously you have to think about what point in your career you are and then target grants that are really focused on that. I will say it does get a little complicated as you get into the mid-career section. I will say there's a lot of foundational funds for early career investigators. There are some for mid-career, but I think as you get into that phase, it does start to get a little bit harder to find foundational grants later on in your career. One good source to think about grants is Proposal Central. Here there is extensive resource listing for types of grants, and you can look across your eligibility for these. Certainly you can Google it, which also can provide lots of ideas. There are foundations that will email you regularly as RFAs become available, and so it's good to get on their email list so that when one does become available, you're emailed about that opportunity right away, because sometimes the deadlines are very tight, and so it is really important to be aware as soon as they come out, because again, sometimes you may just have a month or even sometimes a few weeks to get your proposal together. I will say at our institution, we're pretty lucky in that we have someone who actually oversees foundational grants and will notify you when there are grants that become available that they think you are eligible for. But I think that's probably not a resource everyone has. And so, for example, we do get notifications based on our eligibility on a regular basis from our grant managers. And so very important to meet with them. So I, for example, have all the faculty in our breast program meet with the person within our grants program to go over what they're interested in researching, what level of their career they are, so that person's very well aware of what they're looking for funding in, so that again they're kind of on the lookout for them to help them think through that. Here are a few foundations that I have found to be ones where our faculty have done very well in getting funding for breast cancer related research. Certainly there's BCRF, I think that many are aware of. Susan G. Komen has all sorts of different levels of grants, which can be really helpful. They now even have this career transition grant for people who kind of go through sort of a postdoc or fellowship phase into early career over a 5-year period, which I found to be really nice for people through that transition phase. Terry Proder, I will say a lot of our young faculty, so usually in the last year of fellowship or first year of faculty, a lot of our faculty members will apply to that. Gateway is actually kind of unique because they will fund clinical trials. I've not found too many foundations that will actually support operational costs for a trial, but Gateway really does do this in a wonderful way with pretty significant amount of funding for trials. So again, that is a unique opportunity that they do provide. We'll talk a little bit about some of the ASCO foundational grants, which are really very helpful across all different stages of your career. ACR also on a regular basis has amazing opportunities for funding. Breast Cancer Alliance, SITC, Parker Foundation, Mass Life Sciences, Mary Kay, Rising Tide, ACS, Damon Runyon, the Mark Foundation and the V Foundation. All of these are really great opportunities. And certainly there are many more. I just gave a few examples of ones that I know our faculty have done very well with. When you look at the ASCO grants, again, it is important to keep in mind the type of grants, which are really based on where you are in your career. So for example, the ASCO YIA is really to apply to during your last 2 years of oncology training. So most of our fellows, for example, will apply during their 3rd year of medical oncology fellowship, so just before they're going to go on to faculty. And this does provide a 1-year grant. It's a $50,000 grant, so it's not going to provide a huge amount of salary support, but very prestigious to get. So we usually do have all our fellows apply, again, during their last year of fellowship. The CDA, or Career Development Award, is for your 1st through 4th year of faculty and will provide 3 years of funding. So really nice next step in your early career to get funding. The ACRA awards are a little bit further out, so 4th through 9th year on faculty. And then there are lots of different types of awards to be able to just even attend the ASCO meeting. There's the Global Oncology YIA for global investigators. There's the IDEA Award for people from low middle income countries to be able to get a mentor and attend the annual meeting. So many different opportunities that are there. So when you think about applying to a foundation, I think there's sort of 3 main steps I think about. One is, what are you going to apply with? So what's your area of interest? Think about strategic development for that particular application, and then stewarding this process. So sort of meeting with the foundation, follow up with the foundation, I think is important. So if we take those steps one by one is thinking about, again, what are you going to be applying for? And so here, think about what your area of interest is, look at the particular grant that's available and what the eligibility is, and see if your research concept aligns with that particular grant. So it's very important to check the eligibility. I think a lot of times people spend a lot of time putting together a proposal, then at the last minute realize actually it doesn't work for them. So oftentimes I will say connect with the foundation. Many of these foundations are willing to meet with you. We've done this multiple times with faculty where they'll set aside time, and some of them will just tell you yes or no, your concept aligns with what we're trying to fund, or no, don't waste your time, this isn't in line with what we're looking to fund. And I find that extraordinarily helpful. I'd rather know right away rather than spend a lot of time writing a whole grant proposal that is not in the area of interest of that particular foundation. So do take advantage of that and do reach out to foundations. Again, many of them are very willing to even meet with you prior to you submitting that application. And I will say it's really important to think in detail about your proposal. So to think about, what are your specific aims? Do you have a statistical plan? Who are your mentors for this project? Who are your collaborators? And please think about involving patient advocates. They provide a tremendous resource to also provide feedback on your application, and really nice to get a patient perspective when you're thinking about the work that you're doing. And so it takes time. You can't, if a grant's due in a week, it's very hard to be able to get all these people to help you in that very tight time frame. Again, you need letters of support, you need your statistician to review and put together a statistical plan with you. And we can tell when we review these grants when that isn't done correctly or well, and that's where you get dinged. So to do this well is really important, and it does take some time. So really, when you're thinking about this, when the reviewers are looking at it, one thing they're looking at is, can this grant get done in the time frame? If it's a 1-year grant, is this project feasible in 1 year? I've reviewed grants where someone says they're going to do correlative science on a clinical trial, and the trial hasn't even started enrollment. Well, I know it's not really so possible for them to really do that in the next year if they haven't even enrolled the patients to be able to have the biospecimens to do that analysis, right? So, the reviewer notices these things, and you've got to show that you can get the project done in the time frame that is allocated within the grant. And so show this to the reviewer. Put together a very clean timeline. We love this when we're reviewing grants, where we can see step by step how each of these pieces of the grant are going to get done and what the time frame is. Having a little timeline table in there is always a big plus that the reviewer likes to see very simplistically. So again, really think about these things up front. Make sure you have not sent a letter of support to your department chair 5 minutes before it's due. It's nice to try to draft these letters for people that are providing support, but then allow them time to really edit and put, a robust letter of support together for you. Again, if you're having patient advocates involved, really wonderful to get their feedback along the way and not just ask them for a letter of support, but really to make sure that you're working closely with them for feedback on the project, and you've given them plenty of time to help with that feedback and potentially provide a letter. When you're doing a lay summary, that's a really key piece to get advocate feedback on, because sometimes those are hard for us to do, and make sure that it's clear to an advocate reviewer, for example. And then budget, again, this is another piece the reviewer is going to look at. They want to make sure that they understand what is being funded. So to make sure your budget justification is quite clear. And really, again, make sure you have time once the whole proposal is together that you've sent it back around to your mentor, to the statistician, to the advocate, to your team, so that everyone has laid eyes on it and has made comments and edits. So again, that you're putting your best foot forward when you do submit. And so I think just things that you think about when you're writing your application is you really need to know your audience. Who's reviewing this application? What are they looking for? What are the goals of funding? Are you in line with that? Do you have an example of a successful proposal to this foundation? Maybe one of your colleagues has written a grant to this particular foundation that's already been funded. Well, get that example. That's super helpful for you to follow and have an example of a successful grant proposal. And again, take advantage of those foundations who will meet with you to give you feedback up front, so that, again, you have better chances of success. And then please do acknowledge the foundations who funded you. To them, this is really critical for them to continue to get funding support. They want to show that the work that they've supported has been successful, has been published, has been presented, and it acknowledges their funding. So really important to make sure you do that. And do follow up with timely reporting back to the foundation. Again, they've funded you. They want to see how your work is going. They don't like it when you're not providing project updates in a timely manner, and you want to be able to, again, continue to be successful in this work. So, I think, again, these opportunities are incredible. There's so many different foundations that provide funding for breast cancer research and will allow you to get pivotal data that could allow you to be successful for larger grant proposals, and can allow you to have other support for things that you need to do, like to go to meetings and support publication costs and all of those things. So again, I would just keep your eyes and ears open for opportunities, and do, again, just prepare in advance. I think that's my biggest piece of advice, is to be successful. It's really hard to do these things in just a few days because, again, it does take a team to really give you feedback and really be able to provide all the information you need for these kinds of grants. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was incredibly helpful. I think sometimes the most difficult thing to think about is where to start and how to get some of these ideas. So even just utilizing some of the concepts that you mentioned, I think in that last slide, as kind of navigates back onto how to think about this, and then going back to some of the foundations that were listed there, doing some exploratory work and really getting an idea as to how you might approach this at various times. And we'll get a conversation going towards the question and answer as well. And I'll look forward to some conversation with Dr. Tolaney on some questions I had and you'll have as well. So I really would like to invite Dr. Korde up to talk to us a little bit from the NCI. She heads the breast and head and neck therapeutics aspect of the CTEP program there at the NCI, and she's going to speak to us a little bit through her experience of the different applications that come through and sometimes navigating what might have been funded if it came through a different avenue or things that she wishes that investigators would have known. So I really enjoy getting the opportunity to listen to you, and then I'll look forward to some conversation to come.
Thank you, Brenda, and thanks everybody for coming to this session. I think it's kind of great to see a lot of people in the audience really thinking about how they can develop their careers and how you can move forward with funding clinical trials. As Brenda said, I'm Larissa Korde. I am a medical oncologist, and I oversee the breast and melanoma portfolios for the Cancer Therapy Evaluation Program, which runs our cooperative group clinical trials. And so I'm going to talk mostly about that, but I did want to give sort of back up a little bit and just give a little bit of an overview about NCI funding in general and NCI grant mechanisms. So it's a little bit old, from 2022. At that point in time, the NCI budget came in at about $6.7 billion. A large part of that goes toward what's called the RPG pool, which is the essentially the grant pool. About 43% of the total NCI budget is allocated for research project grants. The R01 is the sort of most well-known of these, but very traditionally, as many people know, somewhat competitive. Currently, the R01 pay line stands at about the 11th percentile, which means that your grant, when it's reviewed, has to be in the top 11% to get funded. And so that may feel like a very, very high bar. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some mechanisms that could kind of get you toward that. In addition, the NCI spends about $151 million on small business innovation research grants and small business technology transfer grants. So this is just sort of a little bit of a more detailed picture of how NCI spends this money. As I mentioned, a lot of this goes into the research grant pool. NIH funding or NCI funding is divided into extramural and intramural. Intramural is for things that occur specifically on the NCI campus, on the NIH campus, and are things that happen at the behest of NIH employees that are physically done through our internal stuff. And then extramural funding is essentially everything else. And that includes both the RPG pool that I mentioned, and then other types of research grants, including K awards, which we're going to talk about a little bit, and then also cooperative group awards, which are the piece that I'm involved in. So we'll talk a little bit more specifically about some of these. So if you look at the types of NIH grants, again, this is, a big portion of NIH funding. The major part of that goes to what are traditional R01s, which are R01s where you have your idea and you submit the grant. A smaller piece of that goes to R01s that come as a response to RFAs. So NCI will put out specific calls for specific types of research or research questions, and then those you apply specifically to those if your idea fits into that. The PO1 program project grants are larger grants where there's multiple people at the same institution usually involved, and it's multiple different pieces. We're going to talk a little bit about R21s and R03s, and then there's sort of a number of other mechanisms. The U mechanism, the NCI cooperative groups are funded through U10 grants. So just thinking about NIH funding programs by career stage, the R01, really the full R pool, is designed for established investigators. The R01 grants are the largest of those, and then the smaller ideas and smaller grants include the R03s and R21s. For early career, we think about K awards. These are generally mentored awards. And then there's also some transitional grants. So there is a mechanism called K99 ROO, which is meant to help investigators in the transition from fellowship to independent investigator. And then there's also a transitional mechanism for graduate students going into postdoctoral or residency levels of training. NCI also does things like loan repayment, certain supplements for enhancing diversity, and bunches of other things where it's kind of too much to get into in one slide, but there's lots and lots of different aspects of this funding. So when you're thinking about kind of, you have an idea, where do you want this to go? These are just a little bit of kind of key pieces of information about the different grant mechanisms. So an R01 is really intended for a mature research project that's hypothesis-driven and has strong preliminary data, whereas the R03 and R21 grants are smaller grants for sort of more tightly focused, shorter projects. And the R21 in particular is really aimed at encouraging exploratory or developmental research by providing support for early and conceptual stages of project development. So think of R21 as sort of high risk, high reward, things that are innovative, things that are new. And really, you know, some of the key things here, the R01 and R03 grants, sorry, the R03 and R21s are a smaller amount of money, they're time limited, but they don't require preliminary data. So if you have something in sort of early development, this might be the right mechanism. Whereas an R01 requires strong preliminary data, it's a 5-year grant and it's renewable, and obviously there's a lot more money available through that mechanism. And then just a quick note on the early career awards. The K01 is a mentored investigator award that offers both salary support and some funding for research. But in order to be eligible, you have to be able to spend 75% of your time doing research. And then the K99 ROO, as I mentioned, is really for a transition from your training into the independent career. It's important for these ones to look specifically at what's being offered because they are not offered in all areas. So you have to see whether there are K awards for the specific type of work you're interested in. So I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about the NCI-supported cancer clinical trials networks. Through the Cancer Therapy Evaluation Program, we fund 2 networks, the Experimental Therapeutic Clinical Trials Network, or ETCTN, which is involved in early phase treatment trials, really in terms of drug development. And then the NCTN, or NCI's National Clinical Trials Network, which is responsible for larger phase 2 and our randomized phase 3 studies that happen in our cooperative group network. And then a third piece of this that is not under my division, is actually under the Division of Cancer Prevention, is the National Community Oncology Research Program, or NCORP, which is responsible for funding and overseeing cancer prevention and screening studies, symptom management trials, and cancer care delivery studies. So the NCI's NCTN, or National Clinical Trial Network, is a network of 5 US and 1 Canadian clinical trials group that work together to do large phase 3, mostly phase 3 clinical trials. Each of the groups operates with its own operational center, statistical center, biobank, and has specific member sites. And then there are a number of centralized functions that support all of them, including our central IRB, our clinical trial support unit, which does regulatory stuff, our imaging core as well. Any member site in any one of these groups can put patients on the trials of any one of the other groups, as long as the institution that you're at has that trial open. So institutions have access to trials in every single cooperative group if they're a member. And same with NCORP sites. They can enroll to any trial as long as they have that trial open. So the NCTN coordinates and supports trials at more than 2,000 sites across the US and Canada, and also we have some international sites as well. So what if you have an idea? How does an idea become a trial? So for things that are early in development, for phase 1 trials or for pilot feasibility studies, these are submitted to us through LOIs, letters of intent, and reviewed internally, and decision is made by NCI CTEP. For the larger studies that go through the NCTN, ideas for randomized phase 2 and 3 trials are submitted as concepts, and they're reviewed in our system of disease-specific steering committees. Our steering committees include expertise in, so for example, in the breast cancer steering committee, we have medical oncologists, radiation oncologists, surgeons, obviously statisticians, biomarker experts, and then whatever additional expertise is needed. We also have representatives from our spores and from community sites. So here's just a little graphic of how a study goes from a thought in your head to an actual clinical trial in the NCTN system. Each group has sort of its own policies and oversight and rules about member sites and how you get on committees and those types of things, which I'm happy to talk about in a little bit more detail during the Q&A if that would be helpful. Group representatives meet among themselves generally twice a year, and we try to encourage them to meet with each other and collaborate and play nicely together, which doesn't always work out well, but we do our best. But essentially, if you have an idea and you your institution is a member of an NCTN group, the first step would be to go to the disease-specific committee at the NCTN group that you're a member of and bring that idea up. That idea is then sort of reviewed with that committee. There's a fair amount of back and forth in terms of helping you develop your idea. Most of them, I would say, are very good about really wanting to invigorate and push forward their young investigators, and so they really do want to hear from you about your ideas. And so during that process, you essentially start to develop your concept. Once your concept is sort of in good shape, it has statistics, it has all the preliminary data, it has everything that you need, and the disease-specific group approves it to move forward. It then goes to the NCTN group leadership or executive triage committee, where it's reviewed and then hopefully approved to move forward. And then once that approval has taken place, it can be submitted to us, to the NCI, and it's obviously assigned to the disease-specific steering committee, and it's reviewed in our steering committees. For the first review in a steering committee, there are 3 possible outcomes: approval, disapproval, and then pending. And a pending decision means that we think that the idea is good, we like it, we think it should move forward, but there are some pieces of it that need to be altered in some way or changed or fixed. But those changes can occur within 90 days. And so if you get a pending response, then you have 90 days to resubmit, addressing the concerns. And then it's re-reviewed by the steering committee with one of 2 decisions, either approval or disapproval. And then once a study is approved, it goes into protocol development, which I believe is the topic of the session that starts at 2:30 today. So I won't get into that. Also, there is a step of drug commitment. If it's a study that involves a drug that we at CTEP have a cooperative, a CRADA agreement for, then we would supply the drug, and so we'd have to get drug commitment from the company. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my section on the ETCTN, I think. So just to give you a sense of the numbers, currently the NCTN has more than 200 treatment trials enrolling, including about 20% in the pediatric space, more than 200 trials that have completed accrual and still have patients in treatment or follow-up. In the past 5 years, there have been 44 concepts and LOIs approved, 39 trials activated, and over 13,000 patients accrued to studies. And this figure is just a depiction of our current breast cancer portfolio. There's a lot of letters and numbers on here that probably don't make a lot of sense, but if you go to the link at the bottom of this, and I'm happy to make my slides available to folks, but if you go to the link at the bottom, each study, if you click on the little box, will give you the full title of the study and information about the study. And so we have studies that are in the neoadjuvant space, post-neoadjuvant, for example, after a patient has had neoadjuvant therapy and then surgery in either those who have a PCR, which is a study led by the great Dr. Tolaney, and then those that have residual disease. We have studies in the adjuvant setting, and then we have a number of studies also in the metastatic setting. Just a couple of words about the ETCTN, which again is our network that does early phase trials. This group is aimed at conducting early phase clinical trials of agents that we have under CRADA agreements. And the way that this network works is that if you have an idea and you belong to one of the member institutions, you can submit an LOI for that if it involves a drug that we have under IND. And that's important because when CTEP holds the IND for a drug in a clinical trial, that means that we supply the drug, we do the regulatory stuff, we interact with the FDA, and we actually, physically mail the drug out to the sites. And so some of those costs that are involved in these types of studies are taken care of by our system, which means that you don't have to find money to get those things done. The other thing about our ETCTN trials is they really do try to incorporate preclinical findings and use clinical samples for biomarker analysis. So a trial in the ETCTN often will include biopsies as long as there is a strong rationale and a biomarker that is analytically validated. So there are, I believe, 8 grants to lead academic organizations through the ETCTN, and then each one of those has a number of academic institutions under it. And so you can see from the little map that the coverage here includes a very large network of academic sites. And then finally, the NCORP program, or the NCI Community Oncology Research Program, as I mentioned, focuses on cancer prevention and screening, symptom management, and cancer care delivery. This involves 7 research bases, 32 community sites, as well as 14 minority and underserved community sites. And the goal here is to bring all of the NCI clinical trials to a community setting instead of having them just be, running at academic centers. And the NCORP network includes more than 1,000 practices at a diverse collection of different community-based sites and private practices. So just a quick summary of what I've gone over today. When you're thinking about the sort of traditional grant mechanisms in the NCI, RO1s are sort of the biggest piece of it, but those are really aimed at something where you have a well-developed idea and strong preliminary data. You should consider K awards, R21s, RO3 if you're in the early career phase or you have a research question that's in early development. And then if your site participates, then the NCI Cooperative Group Network is, I think, a really great place for young investigators to kind of find their feet in clinical trials, including through the ETCTN, which does the early phase trials, and the NCTN, which does large confirmatory phase 3 trials. And then finally, if your area of interest is more in the cancer prevention screening, symptom management, or cancer care delivery side, then getting involved in the NCORP program would make a lot of sense. And I believe that that is the end of my presentation. Thank you guys so much for your attention. More than happy to answer questions or go deeper into any of these things that I know a lot about.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask our technician if he could assist us with just placing up that QR code to get us back into the question and answer session, just so that people that are here, as well as those that are online, if they're thinking of questions as the content's being created, that you'd have a place to go to and formulate some of those questions that we'll return to in a short while. So I'll just see if we can bring up the QR code to our question and answer aspect for a moment. Could we display that? Perfectly. And I did see a couple of questions come up early, but if you wouldn't mind when you are putting some of these questions, if you have a specific speaker you'd like to address it, please let us know. Otherwise, maybe we'll get some input from each of the speakers here, or the one that it correlates best to. And with that in mind, I have the great honor to introduce Dr. Minetta. She was one of my mentors when I came to Mayo Clinic early on, and now I get to engage with her in a different space as she's over at Natera as the Chief Medical Officer and working in that space. She's going to talk to us a little bit about the interactions with industry, and I know in my own research this was kind of a not only taboo subject, but also one that I found very difficult to navigate, and what's okay, what's not okay when people would approach you at meetings like this to think about opportunities for collaboration. And so hopefully our conversation will lend itself towards that a little bit, but thank you very much.
So I'm really old, but I've been very privileged to intersect through my career with these 3 lovely ladies and colleagues. So my name's Minetta. I trained as a medical oncologist. I was always focused in breast cancer clinically, I also worked in phase 1 because when you're a medical oncologist, you have to work in therapeutics, but my heart was always in biomarkers. I started again in academics. I was at Georgetown University in practice for about 11 years, and then Mayo Clinic, Minnesota for about 10 years. And then 2.5 years plus ago, I made the crossover to the dark side. And I don't think there is light and dark. I do think that we all need to work together. It requires a community to try to beat cancer. So everything is about pulling people together, connecting the dots, creating hybrids. So I proudly launched myself into this career in industry. I love the fact that I still get to work with my colleagues in academics and interface with folks at the NIH and FDA as well. So just a little story about how I got started. So I don't have any elegant slides with a lot of words because this was more about sort of storytelling and giving you advice. And happy to obviously have questions in our Q&A session. So I was lucky enough to serve as the chief fellow at Georgetown, and way back when, which is that long ago, you could actually have drug lunches, right? So the sign-up sheet was in my office, and drug company representatives would come in and sign up for lunch, and I get to talk to them all the time. And then I guess it was less taboo, right? Because now you can't even drink the water from, if they give it to you, right, in the exhibit hall. But they're people, and they have a job to do, and you can actually learn from them. And so one of the representatives from J&J was coming and, signing up for lunch, and he goes, "Hey, Minetta, I know that you like all this technology stuff, right? And you like the lab and whatever. J&J has this corollary called Veridex that's working on this machine. We're not really sure what it does. It does something in the blood, and would you be willing to talk to them? Because I can't find anybody who's willing to talk to them." And during even my fellowship, I was always doing work looking in the bloodstream because I really felt strongly that something in the blood, like the tumor material, and there's material there, it's going to tell us a story. Technology is going to let us find it. So I said, sure, and I met with them. So they had the machine basically looking for circulating tumor cells, and it sort of launched projects for me. I ended up doing work not only in circulating tumor cells, but now in cell-free DNA, because you kind of have to go with the times. I still believe in CTCs, even though my company doesn't. I will just formally state that. But it was an ability to have a technology. As a clinician, I could bring patients and samples to it, and then was lucky enough to get government funding to help forward that work, right? It's all about hybrids. I got some foundation funding to help support my time, to help support some of the work, and you just got to get it done, right? So industry can be helpful. It may not be the only source of funding. That's why I think it's about interacting with industry, about learning what opportunities there may be. Sometimes you can kind of sneak in because it's a little bit less formal than going to foundations or going to the NIH. Stop advancing. But anyway, so can you use that? I can just babble, basically. We don't need to. So my main disclosure is I work at Natera. So what do we have up here? Okay, so I sort of bucket funding sources into 3. And again, I think it's not just 3, and you can blur the line. So there's industry, right? And industry includes pharmaceutical companies, but also biotech, right? And so I work in biotech, I work in diagnostics, very different world, I'll tell you. But they both have products that can be helpful. And in this world where we're getting towards precision oncology, individualized cancer care, you need to marry the two, right? Pharmaceutical companies don't always like diagnostic companies because our products are trying to tailor the use of their drugs as opposed to giving it to everybody. So that's a fun dance that we get to do. But you as clinician researchers, as you're thinking about clinical trials, correlates in studies, you're in the driver's seat, right? You know what your patients need, you know what the space needs to answer those questions, and you can bring people to the table, right? Remember, you are actually in the driver's seat. It doesn't feel like that because someone else has the pocketbook. But they need you, and they need you to connect those dots together. So from the industry side, funding can be anything from getting the drug because you're interested in, applying whatever new therapeutic in whatever new clinical setting, or a test that you want to incorporate into a clinical trial, and it's basically providing you either the drug or the test at no cost. There are situations where funding can be provided for the operations, right? Pharma does that more. They are more about controlling the entire study, right? Biotech actually doesn't have as much money as pharma, so it's harder to invest in all of the operational costs, but there are circumstances where that can be. There are companies that will put out formal requests for applications, but many times these are sort of informal, it's who you know, right? So along the lines of, don't shut the door when someone from a company, wants to come and just talk to you, or you see somebody in the coffee line here in San Antonio, strike up a conversation, because you never know what that's gonna lead you. So I'm privileged at Natera. I work with the medical affairs team, so I oversee the medical science liaisons, the medical directors, the translational science team, and scientific communications. Any one of those group members is an entree into the company, right? And it's just talking to them. It's learning from them perhaps about the product, but more importantly, and I'm begging you, teach them, okay? They need to know what's important from the patient and the physician perspective, both in terms of how you're practicing and taking care of people, but also what the questions are that we need to help answer, right? And striking up that relationship, they're gonna remember, and maybe there's a study that we're developing or a product that we're trying to get out there, and we're gonna remember, so-and-so that I met in the coffee line in San Antonio told me they were interested in X. And maybe that's something that we should do, right? So in the world of Google, you can dig up, you don't have to hand cards out all the time, and those things randomly happen. So funding can come to you both formally and informally. So that's industry in a sort of a nutshell. You heard about NCI funding. It doesn't mean that there can't be industry funding supporting an NCI grant, right? Again, it could be the provision of test, it could be the provision of drug, it can be provision of some funding, right? It's getting creative, because I'd say no one mechanism is going to cover the costs of everything that you need to do for your project, unless you're only looking at like 5 patients and 5 samples and 1 drug kind of thing. So to do it right, piece it together. There are mechanisms within the NCI that actually bring company and government together. So you heard a little bit about the SBIR and the STTR mechanisms. So these are actually driven by small businesses and like early startups, where there can be a collaboration with an academic institution or a provider, even in private practice. This can happen. So typically the investigator on the academic side is not the driver unless they're the inventor. But there are many small companies out there with good drugs, good technologies, and a little bit of funding and the ability through either of these mechanisms to kind of get you started, right? And you don't have to be someone in the lab who's trying to invent something. You have a question that needs an answer, and maybe they have a product that can help you answer it, and it's just piecing it together. The SBIRs are on the order of about $300,000. The STTRs are bigger, on the order of like $2-3 million. Again, you can look at the NCI website, and there may be companies out there, they need you, right? We need you. I have to say we now because I'm on the industry side. But there is a need. And you may not realize it, but again, you're in the driver's seat. Remember that. And then cancer foundations are remarkable resources. They pull together funds from many different groups, including corporations or industry. So there are cancer foundations that accept funding from industry. And if you're worried about like being tainted by industry, basically a company will provide the foundation with dollars. And then that foundation is actually in the driver's seat for directing how those funds are used in the award mechanism. So as an example, Natera will give funding to Foundation X. Foundation X will put out the RFA. They'll say it's funded by so-and-so. It's unrestricted, sort of an educational grant. Natera, for example, doesn't have any say in who's getting awarded or what's being done within that grant. But there, again, funding out there everywhere, even NCCN, right, has ASCO. Conquer Cancer. They all accept dollars from industry, and that's something that we like to do to help foster, again, fields moving forward. Although we don't have as much control over it in industry, doesn't make it any less important. So connecting the dots. Am I supposed to use this? Okay. So how do you find funding? I say dial a friend, talk to your mentor, talk to colleagues, talk to people in the coffee line. I'm so grateful that we're not in the pandemic anymore, because during those couple of years, one of the things I worried the most about, and I was still in academics at the time, was the fact that the fellows, trainees, junior faculty were at home and not able to network. Right? I keep bringing up the coffee line, but those like acts of randomness are really important. And to have someone in line with you who can introduce you to so-and-so who is in passing, again, those are like critical interactions. So I'm grateful that we're all able to be in a room together. But we are also, I guess, grateful to have the internet, right? So you can search anything. Proposal Central is a really good resource. It does include industry funding as well as foundation and government funding mechanisms in there. The foundation websites will all post RFAs you can get on their mailing list. Company websites will have different ways of trying to get in. And again, talk to your friendly MSL, your medical science liaisons, because they're going to know what's happening in their company. And if they know that you're interested in something, they trust me, they will take note and they will contact you. Okay. And again, medical affairs team members, just like, you don't have to take lunch from them or anything, just talk to them and say hi. Okay, so I wanted to just share with you some stories, my own sort of stories about how you can connect the dots and network. So I'm very lucky that during my academic career, I was involved in a lot of consortia and not just within one institution, but bringing groups together. Mostly I was on the biomarker side, but again, it was about clinical trials, how do you improve patient care? So from the cooperative group mechanisms, as you just heard from Dr. Korde, I was part of CALGB way back when it was CALGB, and then became the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology. So that is the NCI-funded cooperative group. Okay, it's part of the NCTN. But these different cooperative groups, if we're supposed to use that word anymore, but they have foundations attached to them. And those foundations support clinical trials, but they're not NCI funded, okay? So there is some separation of church and state, if you will. That's not to say that within the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology, NCI-funded mechanism, clinical trial gets launched, that there isn't some industry funding support those trials, right? The drugs have to come from somewhere, the biomarker tests have to come from somewhere. So again, they're hybrids, but those trials have to go through the approval mechanisms, right, through both the cooperative group as well as the NCI steering committee, which is important, but sometimes other tracks are helpful too. So these foundations are really supporting industry-sponsored studies, not to bypass the NCI, but to offer opportunities where industry can bring a trial forward and then take advantage of the cooperative group mechanism, which is an amazing network, whichever group it is, Alliance, ECOG, NRG. If I'm forgetting anyone, I'm sorry. SWOG, damn, sorry. But they're all very important. The foundations, though, again, are allowing us to perhaps bring trials forward a little bit faster. Industry will have their own style and the way they want the trials conducted, so it is a mechanism to move forward. These foundations will also, within the cooperative groups, will also have like career development awards, right? And some of that money is actually coming from industry as well. So I think I learned so much by being part of the cooperative groups. And again, I'm lucky I still get to interact with them. It's on the other side, but it's no less fun. Another consortium, a breast cancer-specific consortium, is the Translational Breast Cancer Research Consortium. And there are other consortia like this. This was a network of breast cancer academic practices that started out originally because they were all spores. They were NCI-funded special programs of oncologic research excellence. And so they were all invited to be a part of TBCRC, and it's now expanded so that there are other academic sites as well, because spores kind of come and go. TBCRC is about translation. So it is about doing clinical trials, but all of them have this important translational endpoint. It is a group that is really supported just by the energy of the people involved in TBCRC, their dedication to trying to improve breast cancer care through translational research, and are bringing funding through industry, through whether it's pharma or biotech. Some will have some grant funding. TBCRC has funding unto itself, and it's really piecing everything together. If you're an institution that is part of the TBCRC, I'd encourage you to find, the PI, talk to them, try to get involved, listen in on the calls. If anything, it's a great learning experience. And within that network, there will be discussions about funding opportunities and how do we piece the money from here and there, again, including industry. And then lastly, and there are many other examples, but is the I-SPY 2 team. The I-SPY, I was involved in I-SPY for when it was I-SPY 1, like way back when. And it's now blossomed into a prospective interventional clinical trial, soon to be sort of flipped on its edge as I-SPY 2.2. But this is a network, again, of clinical practices focused in neoadjuvant therapy for breast cancer. We're bringing investigational agents into a curative setting, right? So it's not marching for metastatic disease in like third line to second line, first line. Maybe we'll bring it into the adjuvant setting. It's bringing it carefully into a curative setting, along with biomarker correlates to make sure that you made the right decision. It has funding from the NCI. It has funding from many different industry partners who are supplying the drugs, supplying the biomarkers in some cases, helping to support some of the operations. It is a tour de force, as are TBCRC, the Alliance, and the other cooperative groups. And it is a way, as a junior investigator, to get in on it, right? You may not go there to get funding, but you will go there and make connections and bring your questions to these groups, and they can help you to find funding as well. So, we always think, I'm junior faculty, I have to get that grant, I need a line item, on my CV because I need to get promoted to the next step. And it's an unfortunate way that promotions happen, I think, in academics. I wish we could turn this upside down because you should be recognized about the work, not about every line item, meaning a grant or a publication, again, because this is a community where we're trying to do better. But nonetheless, you got to find funding somewhere. If you have a great idea, stick to it and find the right people and put them around you to help make it happen. So I think that's it, just pieces of the puzzle. And contact me anytime. Thank you.
So I really enjoyed listening to that as kind of a tail end, but also an introduction into some of the questions that maybe you'll have and that our online audience has as well. I'm going to give us all a few minutes to just kind of stretch, take a deep breath, and I'm going to ask if we can return to some of the polling questions. We'll give this another shot and just kind of narrowing in on a few of the other things for a few minutes before we launch into some of the questions that had been coming through during the talks. But one of the things that I think we really get excited about is the not only correlative, but also the translational work when we really can test how an agent works in real life in that preoperative setting or in your patient if you're in the metastatic space and you're speaking to a patient who's really come in and maybe looking for hope at the end of a road that they've really journeyed on a long time. So seeing the actualization of things like I-SPY and really understanding the collaboration that goes into so many minds and ideas that formulate something like I-SPY, which is really a combination of testing newer agents and preoperative patients that are undergoing surgery, and then allowing for a pivot depending on what their response is. And that's giving us a lot of information about how these agents work and hopefully improve the care that we can give to patients. So I just wanted to give like that breath of refreshment maybe, and some of these are a little lighter, but give you an opportunity to tell us about yourselves as to where you are in your own career track, if you're listening online or if you're here in the audience. And I think some of this might have mirrored a little bit of our others, so I won't belabor this too long. But some that are joining us with even, greater than 15 years after training, and still, I think this is really relevant. Myself, I'm in the 11-year mark or so since I got engaged in breast cancer work, and I still feel like there's so much more for me to learn and engage with mentor or like the speakers here. I've learned a lot along with you. And then for some that might be a little bit further along in their career, if you've applied for investigator-initiated trials, have you been funded already? Or for others that are just kind of getting into this thought space, you can disregard that or just list one. I think one of the most telling things that was told to me after I holed myself up in a hotel with a young baby and said I was going to finalize this application for an application I was applying for in career development, and got some feedback about whether I was hungry enough for that research and how much I was willing to give, and ultimately asked me to reapply. And I said to myself, I'm not sure how many times I can go through this process. And the wise advice from many that came alongside me was comforting, but said, get ready. There's going to be a lot more weeks in hotels that you're going to eat, breathe, and really just live research. And that has come true to many of the pathways and kind of what's been some early success, but hopefully more to come. And so I think if you're really passionate about this, you'll recognize that it's going to be a lot of applying. And many times you are going to get some feedback that's going to be really pivotal to then submitting again, and take that feedback if you can, a little better than I did, and recognize that, like Dr. Korde had mentioned, some of this is really going to help you identify a different path or better direction within the path or the application that you're utilizing so that you can be funded, or how Dr. Tolaney had mentioned, like, will it fit in what you're asking for funding for, making sure that those timelines look right. For those that were funded on IITs, just quickly what the pathway for funding for that was. And I think this will be important to people that look at the responses too, to recognize in real time who's actually making it happen. Not only everybody up here on the panel, but also many of you in the real world. So I think a pretty broad group of responses, all the way from industry partnership to government or federal grants, institution funding being a really key one, I think, especially for people that are early on in their career. And then, interestingly, some self-funded research as well. I think sometimes in my desperation, I thought to myself, maybe if I could just make more money and fund this research myself. Then somebody tipped me on the shoulder and said, for many of the work and items that you want to do, you'll probably never make enough money to self-fund, so get used to having these conversations. And then finally, thinking towards the next time that we get together, our afternoon session a little bit later is really going to be about protocol development, but we hope to also bring to San Antonio sessions in the future, like some things that you might be interested in learning. So that question really is about how we can best deliver that to you. I'm really excited to see the leading conversation being about writing effective and innovative protocols. So I can direct you to our 2:30 conversation. And I feel really gratified that I could deliver so quickly on what some of you are interested in. And I think that's going to be a really good conversation, not to take away from the conversation we're having here, but really as we enter into the post-COVID era with so many of the technologies and growth opportunities that we grew through on how to bring protocols to the patients. That session is really about innovation and effectively designing patient-centered protocols. So the other aspects here that really are coming through around statistics and strategies for multidisciplines, I think will come through in some of the conversation we're having today, and really hallmark on that, and hopefully we can build around some content to come back in our next sessions in the future. So with that in mind, we've had quite a few good questions come through, but I also wanted to make sure that I gave some audience interaction here in person. So if there are any of the audience here, I'll give you some priority in introducing yourself or coming forward to the microphone, and just say who you are and where you are in your training, and if you have any questions to ask. We're a pretty friendly group. I'll start with one. I think one of the things that was pretty daunting to me when I looked at different avenues of funding and application was identifying if I was too late or too funded in the process to apply for things. And so what might, and this is really open to any of you at the table, what might you say in trying to understand as a fellow that might be looking for their career, they might be midway into fellowship, how they might navigate whether they're looking at these investigator awards, but they don't know where they're going to be working, which I think is really important to some of that protected time. How have you, guided mentees or fellows in that conversation? And maybe with that in mind, it might be a response that looking a little bit later into those. I think some of the VAIL programs and other programs that are out there as well, like when they come into that conversation for trainees is really important. So I don't know if each of you at the table might have something to talk about with regard to that.
Sure, I will say this, I serve on the ASCO review committee, so this comes up a lot with YIA reviews, where a lot of fellows are applying, but may not end up staying at the institution where they submitted their application from. And I think what we're looking at is to make sure that it's feasible for you to still be able to do the work, because, where is your mentor? Where is the work being conducted? Are you still going to be able to do it at your new location? So if you're still able to do it at the new location and the mentor's going to continue to work with you, that's reasonable. If your research direction, though, is going to change with changing institutions, then I would agree it probably makes more sense for you to wait until you go become a first-year faculty member at that new institution and get settled in with your new research, just so that the work is feasible in that new space.
Have you seen as well that might drive some of the conversations towards staying on at your own organization or institution a little longer after fellowship to facilitate some of that work? Dr. Liu, were you going to comment as well?
Yeah, that's what I was going to share, is that there is the opportunity with some of these awards that you get through fellowship to then discuss with the fellowship director if I get awarded this, because a lot of times it's funding for your time to be able to stay on to do an additional year. Other times it's, there's still in many places the traditional 3-year hem-onc fellowship, and some are solid tumor minded perhaps. So instead of, although it's short staffing, not doing your hem year, but spending some of that time to do research along, again, getting creative if you do get that funding.
Thank you. Can we give the mic to the left microphone? And go ahead and introduce yourself.
Again, thank you so much for the awesome speeches. It was very helpful. My name is Abby Siva. I'm one of the breast medical oncologists and the medical director at MUSC, Medical University of South Carolina. I'm sort of in the mid-career area now, but even though I'm in mid-career, I would say in terms of research and IITs, I feel like I'm a little bit on the earlier stage, because prior to moving to MUSC about a year ago, I was at an institution where I was more clinically working heavily, so I didn't have enough time to focus on research and writing IITs and proposals. So looking, right now, I think where I'm struggling is as I have more time to work on research and come up with my own protocols and do dedicated research on breast cancer. Within the institution, I'm able to secure funds because our institution and Cancer Center likes the idea and they are willing to support with funding. But I would like to see how I could improve that and expand it to multi-institutional studies. How can I improve the visibility and collaboration and networking beyond my institution? Usually, like any institution I go, it becomes easier to find the pathway, navigate, and know the people there. But outside that, how do you develop mentorship, collaboration, and help design, move the path forward?
I can give some thoughts on that. I think it really goes back to what Minetta was saying about networking all the time, right? I think there's plenty of people in the same situation that you are, looking to work with others at the sort of same stage of their careers. It's very difficult to do a clinical trial at one institution, right? I mean, you can do a small clinical trial at one institution, but if you want to take your ideas a little bit further, then you really do have to collaborate with others. And so I think just, at meetings like this, finding other people that are in the same situation, working together, or perhaps going through some of the foundations that do support multi-institutional work, like TBCRC or even iSpy, where you can make those connections and then you can utilize those connections in other things that are ideas that you bring up from, sort of that are newly nascent.
I think one other mechanism is the trials in progress, poster sessions, because it's a way to just display what study you have ongoing at your institution. And if you're soliciting partners, you state that. And always don't just stand by your poster. Like, there's time for you to roam around. And you will be surprised at how many other like-minded individuals they are who are sitting there going, God, I wish I found somebody else who was doing this, and could we combine forces? So it's really, again, just finding creative ways to make those connections.
And I'll just add, if your institution is an NCTN member and you're able to go to their group meetings, each of the cooperative groups has in-person meetings twice a year. It's a great place to meet other people who are interested in doing clinical trials. And, obviously, you could join NCTN trials, but you make those connections with other people to do, all the other type of work that you do as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I'm part of SWAG and Alliance. I go to their monthly breast cancer meetings, and that's how I came across a lot of experts like Sara here. And I seek mentorship outside institution by emailing them and asking these questions, because when you're in this one bubble within one institution, you come up with your own idea. You don't even know what are the pitfalls. There's nobody to challenge you. If you are the leader of that group, there's nobody above you to challenge you and ask questions and refine your protocol. So I always go outside the institution and ask for help from experts like Sara here. So that strategy really helps me. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and comments. And I think that's why this kind of conversation in real time is really so important, because we learn from the people on the podium, but we learn from you and the ways that you're doing it, in the everyday. I think we also live in an era right now that is unusual, in that crowdsourcing of critique is sometimes widely available to our dislike, but also an opportunity for you to put yourself out there with visibility. And so remembering in the social platforms too, in between conferences, it's a nice place to go to. If we could direct our sound over to the right mic, that would be great. Introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Absolutely. All right, thank you, Dr. Ernst. My name is Nathaniel Wiest. I'm a third-year Hem/Onc fellow at Mayo Clinic, Florida. Thank you to the panel for the incredibly high-yield presentation. So I'm a third-year fellow in search of my first grant. So, open to different opportunities. And I think some of this was already touched on. Dr. Tolaney, you mentioned about the Conquer Cancer Foundation, but for somebody who, and I'm off cycle, I have a 6-month extended fellowship for some research time, but in the context of not knowing what the next institution may be, can you provide some, just a little bit more advice in regards to perhaps thinking about foundation grants, NIH grants, what the implications of that are? Are there some that would definitely be a no-go? Are there some that it's not a problem? Just a little bit more advice in regards to that issue. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it is very dependent on, the particular foundation that you're applying to. Some of them will let you take the funding with you, and some of them will not when you change institutions. And so it is important upfront to discuss that with the foundation. If you know, for example, you're going to be transitioning somewhere else, and make sure that it is potentially possible to shift. There are lots of opportunities. Certainly there's the, Ask OYAs, ACR has YAs. There's different foundations, in particular your last year of fellowship, that will fund you, including like Terry Brodeur, Susan Komen. So there are lots of opportunities. I think the question in my mind, though, is to make sure that what you want funded is something that you're going to be able to carry out, if there is a shift. And that is what I think is particularly challenging because a lot of the times the idea that you have is along with a mentor at your own institution and potentially with, ongoing work at that institution that may not be so easily moved. And it just depends on if it is a project that can shift with you. Some of the other ideas were to think about extending fellowship time to finish that project, but I realize that's not always feasible to do.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it very much depends on what you're thinking of doing. If you're opening a clinical trial at your institution, then pulling it and opening it somewhere else, that it involves an incredible amount of infrastructure and money, so that might not be feasible. But if it's doing a biomarker on a completed trial and it's mostly your time that, is being dedicated to the work, then that's something that's much more portable. I think you can check with program officers specifically when you're talking about NIH grants, and they will, they're generally very, very helpful in terms of figuring out not only, is your idea right for this particular mechanism, is this responsive to a particular RFA, but also some of those logistic questions as well.
I'll just add, some of the places I've also found really helpful are the conversations through the ACR program like VAIL, or in my instance, it was through SITC, doing some of the writing workshops. That has also helped connect me in my area of research with the people that sit on a lot of these conversations, with giving me some more direction. And that also probably speaks to some of the questions coming through online about trying to access mentorship. We will, be seeing lots of opportunities at different conferences too, like ASCO, AACR, and at San Antonio, just encouraging you to engage in the, early career lounge spaces and really get to know the people around you so that you can kind of contact again in the future, because some of that conversation will tell you where that's been successful and hopefully connect you with some more real-time information for what you're thinking about. I wanted to go to a couple questions, and then we'll you can stay there if you're interested or come back to the microphone, but I just wanted to make sure I wasn't neglecting the couple that had come online as well. Some questions really about international medical grads, not only people at international institutions, but also I think PhD in translational sciences, thinking about how they navigate into federal funding or also into the industry space. Have you had some advice to give to people that might be making that transition?
So there are some specific NCI mechanisms that allow international investigators or non-US folks to apply. I think you really have to look in the details of each announcement. I think in one of my slides, there's a couple of notations about certain ones that allow international applicants. I would say that for NCI-funded clinical trials through the NCTN, we fund NCTN member sites. And so that means that if a site is a member of one of the groups, they open the trial, there's a capitation per patient cost, and we pay that money to the site. We have international participants in our groups, and so they get paid the same way. But other than that, we don't really have a way to pay for international accruals to our clinical trials. And so we sometimes partner with other cooperative groups from other countries and do trials together. That can get very, very complicated because there's lots of rules that everybody has to follow everybody else's rules when you do that, right? So we have to follow all the European GDPR rules if we do a trial with a European organization, and they have to do everything that the FDA requires of us. So it does get complicated. I would say that accessing NCI funding as an international investigator is fraught with challenges. I'll just say that. So it may be that other mechanisms for fundings might be a better fit.
It also makes me think about collaboration too, even in your discussion earlier about if you're at a member institution or you may find yourself at a non-member institution, but identifying maybe the closest member institution that you could partner with and engage with so that that kind of opportunity would still exist for you through that option. One of the other questions that had also came through is thinking just about the opportunities for phase one when we think about federal programs and where those come into play, and maybe if there's a word on that.
So if you just look up ETCTN online, you will see the list of member sites. There is, through our ETCTN, there's also a program called EDOP, which allows, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it allows institutions that might not necessarily be one of those sites to participate. And then there's a specific mechanism called CRADLE, which is for career development for young investigators, where we do a little bit more mentorship and a little bit more working with the investigator before they submit an LOI. I think it's a fabulous opportunity if you're at an institution that is an ETCTN member site. Our folks in our investigational drug branch and myself, other disease-specific folks that more oversee our late phase clinical trials, are always happy to meet with young investigators. We have you just present a brief slide set. We talk to you about, what's going to fly and not fly in our network. There's some very specific things that happen in review, and we can give you sort of a preview of that when you present an idea to us. So we can kind of help you, if you're coming to us with a randomized phase 2 clinical trial that has 300 patients, it's not going to fly in the ETCTN. So we can tell you those things up front. So always, just reach out to the folks that are in charge, and we can definitely give you advice.
I wanted to bring the microphone back to give you an opportunity to ask a question you had as well.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask the question. I'm Supriya Koya. I'm a breast oncologist at Oklahoma University of Health Sciences. I just joined this year after several years of being in the community, so it's kind of like I'm still like an early investigator. Wanted to ask you two questions. One is like, there was like an IIT that I'm working on. I want to see, it's based on HER3 therapy, if I can make it more like tumor agnostic. It's like a pharma funded, but they have the funding only for breast cancer, but I'm trying to see if there is any tumor agnostic I can do. And the second question is, being new to, I have been doing in the community like all types of cancers, and now trying to be focused on breast. Even in the tumor board and everything, like I get so many questions more related to the breast cancer questions on, in the tumor conferences and everything. I want to like collaborate with somebody who's like really breast cancer focused and be able to have a mentor outside the institute, because in the institution it's the same ideas. Like I want to ask like outside the institute, like how to get a mentor who can help me in my breast cancer path.
I think that's really been pivotal for many of the people that are either at an academic institution or looking to re-enter into academics. And I know ASCO has oftentimes launched, I think, maybe middle of the year, a call for mentorship. And so you can apply to be matched with a mentor. It allows you to split that into the areas of mentorship in your interest. And each year they also call for people that are interested in mentoring. That's a nice opportunity. Are there others that you're aware of, areas that you could go to seek mentorship if maybe not available at your main institution, people could connect with?
I've done the ASCO mentorship thing. I would echo is a really nice one. I've done that for years. You meet with the mentee, usually every few weeks, and it's really a nice opportunity. Sometimes that mentee will run cases past me. Sometimes they'll present a concept that they want to work on and a proposal. So, it's really very open-ended and flexible. There actually are industry companies that also have mentorship programs. We, certainly promote them amongst our faculty too, where you get a mentor at AstraZeneca has a mentorship program, for example, where you can get matched to someone at the company and meet with them monthly, which may be nice when you're thinking about, how to navigate industry collaborations and think through how to put concepts together. So I think there are lots of avenues for that. I think the structured one that I'm most familiar with, though, is ASCO.
It's the one that comes to mind to me as well. Just to touch on that briefly, and then it probably will circle into maybe what you were going to add to. I do know just last year that ASCO and I believe AACR partnered to launch a fellowship industry fellowship. So there are more and more conversations into how to obtain different mentorship mechanisms that may not be the traditional space. And also maybe a word on that, I do see more and more applications offering the opportunity for you to explain if you are a re-entry into academics, maybe a little later from your graduation year, that those were previously a barrier, I think, to for various reasons, many that we're trying to put forth research, and I think we'll see that more as well. I wanted to give you the microphone.
Sort of an informal way to make connections is actually through patient advocacy groups. So there will be other providers, different levels. Some of the advocacy groups will have KOLs, involved, but it's a great way to come around the table around the question, if you will. The bigger advocacy groups will have annual meetings, and it's just, again, a great way to network and bump into people.
I think that really also kind of tests your concepts, at least maybe even in your mind before entering into the formal conversation, to see what's important to your audience, your population, your patients by being part of some of those conversations. It helps me at least refine some of the information I'm thinking about putting forth in a protocol or a program. So I think that's a good reminder, engaging with patient advocate groups in the formal way, but also remembering the voice of the patient and what their input is on your project.
So you have any suggestion on tumor agnostic for any IIT?
Yeah, basket trials and things like that.
Usually I will just say with IITs, I think it's really important to discuss, like if this is something you're getting industry funding for, with the person in the company who's overseeing that particular agent. It depends on the company, and certainly Minetta may want to speak to this more, but they're all structured quite differently. Some of them, when you're thinking about a concept, will have a drug lead, whereas others are disease specific. It's all, so it's a little bit, it's important, your MSL can often direct you to meet with the right people to start those conversations to make sure that, the sponsor is potentially interested in funding something like that. So I will say I've learned the hard way of, I do a lot of IITs over time, and, I think it's really important to have these conversations before you submit the IT concept, because oftentimes the company will just tell you, like, look, we already have that study planned, we're going to be doing this, and it doesn't make sense, for us to fund an IIT in a tumor agnostic space if we're already going to do it, or, so I think having those conversations up front is really important to see if there's interest, and then they can help you navigate the appropriate avenue for how to submit a concept, because sometimes it is different if it's not disease specific or not. It just depends on that individual sponsor.
I'll add this, and then we'll go to the microphone on the right. I think one of the questions that had come through slightly from a different angle is how industry-sponsored projects or programs, trials may look different than maybe IIT or federally funded programs, and who does the writing, how does that come to be about restrictions on the protocol. And I know that some of the conversations have been very limited, but also very supported by maybe an industry-led program that I've participated in, and they may drive a lot of like the protocol writing and establish it and critiquing, whereas in other pathways that I've worked on that are more investigator-driven and started from my own pen, and I do a lot more of the critiquing with my mentor. What has been your experience too on how to navigate who's going to be doing most of the writing of your idea, and also controlling what's okay and what's not in those organizations?
It depends on the mechanism by which you're getting funded. So your traditional IIT, it's a term I really don't like, or investigator-initiated trial, is owned and sponsored by the investigator. So you own everything. You wrote the protocol. Your institution is covering regulatory. Basically, think of the industry partner as a vendor, right? They're giving you funding, they're giving you the drug maybe, or they're giving you testing, but you are in the driver's seat. And so those do exist. There are what I prefer to call collaborations, where you can sort of craft what the relationship is from the get-go. And I urge you all, if you're going to do this, craft it and get it in the contract so that it's clear when you move forward, because you never know who's still going to be there at the end of the day, or if you're going to another institution. And different industry partners will have different levels of support. I have a translational science team, and we want to be there like right next to you and to help if you want, and it's to give you the data you need to make the assumptions and craft your study. Others are very, hands-off. This is, what you want, but at the end of the day, we're going to trash your manuscript and write it for you. So again, it's just important to be really clear from the beginning.
Yeah, I think to me it's understanding a little bit like what's at stake for each of the different players in your project or in your team, and making sure that you balance some of those things, because I think each side wants you to be successful because that's the way they're successful too, but they have something to protect in brand and visibility as well. And so understanding contracts and conversation, formalizing whenever you can what's being told and promised to you. If we could move, I think, for a question here in the audience.
Hi, my name is Daniela. I'm a research fellow at Memórias Slow Catering. I'm from Brazil, and thank you for your excellent presentations. And I received a Concord Cancer this year, the Life grant, and I'm very happy for this opportunity. And for NIH grants like K99, is there a specific study design that's more preferable to be funded, or can we apply any type of study like clinical trials, translational research? And do you recommend talk to the program officers to get some guidance before applying a research project for NIH?
Yeah, 100% talk to the program officer before applying. They are a resource, they want to be a resource. They would much prefer to guide you through the process and help you, figure out if your idea is a good fit than to receive an application that you've spent months working on that is not responsive, right? I would say for specifically for the K99 ROO, I don't think that it's well set up to do a clinical trial. The K99 piece of it kind of covers your salary support and some research, and then, you take that idea and develop it a little bit more. But, maybe not something that we've touched on in this discussion, but the infrastructure that's required to do a well-designed clinical trial is not insubstantial. And so with the amount of money that's coming from these grants, unless you have that infrastructure available to you, it's really hard to put something together with that level of funding.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll take one last audience question as well.
Hello, thanks to the panel. My name's Josh Prohl. I'm a second-year graduate student from here at San Antonio at UT Health. And I just wanted to ask kind of anyone who wants to answer in the panel, what are some other benchmarks besides these grants that maybe an early trainee should look to achieve or aim for to help them secure grants in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, and I appreciate you asking it, because sometimes I think when we do submit for grants, the portion of your bio sketch about your contribution to science and different things can feel a little daunting. So depending on where you are, what other things make a good background when you're submitting for various applications, I think it's really important things to focus on in addition to the grant funding part of your career.
I always find it kind of funny because when you apply for a grant, they're also looking to see what you've accomplished, right? So, they're looking to see, do you have any publications? What kind of work have you previously done, right? They're trying to see that you can do this work. But I always find that a little hard because if it's your first grant, like, why should you have already had multiple publications, right? So it's a little bit of a catch-22. So I will say, I tell our early investigators that, I try to help them, to be honest, to get a few publications out that maybe they weren't the projects they started from the ground up, but they helped finished and then wrote up. And so that way they show that they have a little bit of a track record when they go to apply for a grant. And then we also try to think about what kind of preliminary data do you want to try to build so that when you apply for that grant, you have shown that, you have some initial data for that grant. And so I think it is, I always find it a little silly, but it is true. It's a little bit of gamesmanship that you have to show that you've done something. And so to try to get some projects done that, again, maybe with your mentor, you can just help finish to show that, and then start thinking about getting a little bit of preliminary data to show that, again, you can achieve what you want to.
I'll just add, a good mentor gives you projects, right? And they, not necessarily something that you can do from beginning to end, but like Sarah's saying, things that have been done and need to be written up, like the more senior you get, the less time you have to write things up. And so finding people within your institution who would love to have somebody kind of write the first draft of the paper and ideally be first author, that helps everybody. Gets the information out there and gets you the publication. Also, I think within institutions, there's often a fair amount of kind of seed funding, like things like Cancer Center support grants and stuff, where you can do small, discrete projects with, say, $50,000 or something that get you those just little pieces that you can put on your CV or on your bio sketch that really tell a story about you and your work, so that you can kind of, when you're applying for that kind of first bigger grant, you already have a little bit of the backstory that says, like, these are the things that I've done, this is how they dovetail nicely into what I'm wanting to move forward. So really just about kind of reaching out within your institution for those types of opportunities and finding little pieces of data that are ready to go so that you can write something up.
Yeah, I really think, community opportunities too, to do work and engage, offer a really nice opportunity to get a little bit of funding that's really important perhaps to the audience or the population you're working with. And it also would allow you to show your commitment to taking an idea into a concept and into a completion. It doesn't have to be a giant project, but it kind of does support your interest in ongoing opportunities in the future. And that's another area that I myself have found it can be like the grassroots portion of getting going and establishing momentum. And to that end, I really also I don't think we could say it enough if it didn't come through on the theming, like collaboration has really been the key to any traction that I've gotten in my career, is that I may not have had as much experience in the particular place that I'm as passionate about, but partnering with someone else that might be my collaborator in the lab that has really done some of the work or is a little bit more senior and can help me take my idea or concept into a place that I'm more experienced in the clinical space. So it doesn't always all have to come from you either. And so I think that's where some of these partnership conversations are really not only helpful to protocol development and idea and concept creation, but also to funding, recognizing to the institution that's going to be supporting you that their investment has some commitment behind it, and they can feel assured that you and the team behind you can deliver. And I think that builds a career. It may not, be you who is the first and end of your major success. Sometimes you have to take the wings in the air of someone else, a little more senior to you, and then take that into the next step when you're driving that conversation or grant.
Can I just, as a postdoc too, sometimes you get isolated in the lab and with PhD colleagues in basic science. And if you're in an institution that has a clinical arm, and you are, developing alliances with the clinical group can be helpful as well. They may have projects that aren't really in the lab, but they need, a different mindset. And there are ways to contribute there as well.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Thank you all for your attention and contributions to this conversation. I hope it's been a rewarding portion of your time. I know the rest of the conference is going to be incredibly exciting, and even as we were designing the timing of this, there was a lot competing for your time, and so I really feel privileged and respect the time you've given us, so thank you very much, and I wish you an excellent rest of the conference. We hope to see you at our 2:30 session as well for patient protocol development, and continue the conversation there.